In the middle of the empty parking lot of Mercy's Gourmet Market, a man was pinned to the wet asphalt. His name was Elias, and at that moment he looked like a broken man. 6 police officers surrounded him, their heavy boots splashing in the puddles. The red and blue lights of 3 patrol cars sliced through the darkness, reflecting off the handcuffs that were being ratcheted tight around Elias's thin wrists. Elias didn't fight. He didn't scream. He just pressed his face into the cold pavement, his chest heaving with a sob he was trying to choke back. If you believe that everyone deserves a second chance, if you love stories that move your heart and challenge your soul, please hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on your notifications so you never miss a tale of justice and mercy. And do me a favor, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that stories of kindness still matter in this world. Leave a comment below saying I believe in mercy, and I'll try to heart as many as I can. Now let's go back to the story. And there, lying just a few inches from his face, was the object of his crime, a single crushed loaf of white bread. It cost exactly $2.49. Is this what it's come to? One of the younger officers muttered, looking down at Elias with a mixture of disgust and pity. You're going to jail for a loaf of bread? You really thought you could just walk out without paying? Elias didn't answer him. He was looking at something else. A few feet away, standing under the bright LED lights of the store's entrance, was a man in a charcoal gray wool coat that probably cost more than Elias's entire apartment. That was Julian Vane, the owner of the market, a man known in the city as a ruthless businessman who didn't believe in second chances. The officers looked at Julian, waiting for the word to take the thief away. They expected him to demand the man be charged to the fullest extent of the law. They expected him to turn his back and walk away. But Julian Vane didn't move. He stood there staring at the bread and then at the man in the dirt. And what happened next? The words that came out of Julian's mouth and the revelation that followed didn't just stop the arrest. It brought the entire police force to their knees in tears. Now, before I tell you the rest of this heart-wrenching story, I want to welcome you to our channel. Here we believe that the world is full of hidden heroes and that sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most humble moments. Our mission is to tell stories where the proud are humbled and the broken are restored. We tell the stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Now let me take you back to how it all began. Because to understand why a man would risk his freedom for a loaf of bread, you have to understand the 30 days that led up to this rainy night. Elias Thorne was 42 years old, but if you looked at his hands you would think he was 60. They were calloused, scarred, and perpetually stained with the faint scent of engine oil and sawdust. For 15 years Elias had been a master carpenter at a high-end furniture workshop in North Atlanta. He was the kind of man who could look at a raw slab of oak and see a dining table that would last for 3 generations. He lived by a simple code: work hard, pay your bills, and love your family. His world revolved around his 7-year-old daughter, Maya. Maya was a bright-eyed girl with a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. Since Elias's wife had passed away from a sudden illness 3 years prior, it had just been the two of them. They lived in a small, neat house with a porch Elias had built himself. Every night they had a ritual. He would read her a story and she would tell him her 3 best things about the day. But life has a way of pulling the rug out from under you when you least expect. It started with the efficiency merger. Elias's workshop was bought by a massive conglomerate that cared more about profit margins than craftsmanship. They replaced the master carpenters with CNC machines and cheap labor. On a Tuesday morning, Elias walked into work and was handed a yellow envelope. Oh, thank you. No handshake. Just a severance check for 2 weeks and a good luck. Elias wasn't worried at first. He was a skilled man. But the economy was tightening. Boutique furniture shops were closing. For every 1 job opening, there were 200 applicants. 1 month of unemployment turned into 3. The savings account, which was already thin from his wife's medical bills, evaporated. He sold his tools first. That was the hardest part. Selling the chisels his father had given him, the lathes, the saws. It felt like he was selling his own fingers. Then he sold his truck, replacing it with a bus pass. Then he sold the furniture he had built for their own home. By the 4th month the house was gone. Elias and Maya moved into a one-room apartment in a part of town where the street lights were usually broken and the air smelled of exhaust. Elias took every job he could find. He washed dishes. He hauled trash. He stood outside Home Depot at 5 a.m. hoping a contractor would pick him up for day labor. But the money was never enough. The rent ate half of it. Utilities ate the rest. And then the nightmare truly began. It started with a cough. A small dry sound coming from Maya's bed. Elias thought it was just a cold. He bought her generic syrup and told her to rest. But within 48 hours the cold turned into a raging fire. Maya's forehead was burning. Her breath was coming in short, ragged gasps. Elias took her to the emergency room at the city hospital. They waited for 6 hours in a room full of people coughing and crying. When the doctor finally saw her, his face was grim. It's a severe respiratory infection, likely aggravated by the mold in your building, the doctor said. He wrote a prescription for a high-potency antibiotic and a specialized nebulizer treatment. Elias went to the pharmacy counter. He handed over the slip of paper. That will be $182, the pharmacist said, not looking up from her screen. Elias felt his heart skip a beat. He reached into his pocket and pulled out everything he had. $5 bills, ones, and a handful of quarters. He counted it twice. I have $46, Elias whispered. The pharmacist looked up then. Her eyes were tired. I'm sorry, sir. He dispense the medication without full payment. It's a corporate policy. Please, Elias said, his voice cracking. My daughter. She can barely breathe. I'll bring the rest tomorrow. I'll work. I'll find it. I can't help you, sir. Next in line, please. Elias walked back to Maya, who was huddled in a plastic chair, her face pale. He felt a sense of failure so heavy it felt like a physical weight on his chest. He had done everything right. He had worked hard. He had been a good man. And now, he couldn't even buy the medicine that would save his child's life. He took her back to the apartment. He spent the next 24 hours using cool rags to keep her fever down. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He prayed to a God he hadn't spoken to in years. By the second night, Maya woke up. Her voice was a tiny, ghostly rasp. Daddy, I'm hungry. My tummy hurts. Elias went to the kitchen. He opened the cupboard. There was nothing. Not a grain of rice. Not a spoonful of peanut butter. He opened the fridge. Single bottle of water and a half-empty carton of spoiled milk. He looked at Maya. She was 7 years old. He shouldn't have to know what hunger felt like. She shouldn't have to fight for every breath. Something snapped inside Elias. It wasn't a loud sound, but it was final. The man who had never even had a parking ticket, the man who prided himself on his honesty, died in that moment. In his place was a father. And a father will do things a man never would. He kissed Maya on the forehead. I'll be right back, baby. I'm going to get you some food. And I'm going to get you some medicine. He walked out into the rain. He didn't have a plan. He just walked until he reached the bright, glowing lights of the upscale neighborhood 3 miles away. He stopped in front of Mercy's Gourmet Market. It was a beautiful store. Through the windows he could see piles of fresh fruit, rows of artisan bread, and shelves stocked with expensive wines. It was a world of abundance, a world that had forgotten people like him existed. Elias stepped inside. The warmth of the store hit him, making his damp clothes feel even heavier. He walked to the back, toward the pharmacy section. The shelves of over-the-counter medicines. He saw a bottle of the high-grade fever reducer the doctor had mentioned. He grabbed it and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Then he walked to the bakery. The smell of fresh bread was agonizing. He picked up a simple loaf of white bread. It was warm. He could feel the soft texture through the plastic. He stood there for a second. His heart was hammering against his ribs so hard he thought it might burst. He looked at the checkout counters. There were cameras everywhere. There were security guards near the door. He could have tried to hide the bread. He could have tried to run. But as he stood there, Elias felt a strange sense of exhaustion. He didn't want to be a thief. He just wanted his daughter to eat. He tucked the bread under his arm and started walking toward the exit. He didn't look at the cashiers. He didn't look at the customers. He just focused on the automatic doors. 5 feet. 3 feet. 1 foot. He stepped out into the rain. He had made it. But he hadn't gone 10 yards before a heavy hand landed on his shoulder. "Sir," a voice said. "Hold. Professional. I think you forgot to pay for something." Elias stopped. He didn't turn around. He just looked up at the gray sky and closed his eyes. "Please," he whispered. "My daughter, she's sick." "Save it for the police," the security guard said, spinning him around. 10 minutes later, the patrol cars arrived. And that was when Julian Vane, the owner of the store, stepped out from his office to see what the commotion was about. Julian Vane walked slowly toward the circle of police officers. Every step he took on the wet pavement sounded like a gavel hitting a sounding board. He was 55 years old, with silver hair swept back and eyes that looked like they had seen every trick in the book. He was a man who had built an empire of 32 gourmet markets across the South. He was known for his precision. He was known for his lack of sentimentality. "What do we have here?" Julian asked. His voice was a low baritone cutting through the sound of the rain and the idling engines of the patrol cars. "Shoplifter Mr. Vane," the senior officer, Sergeant Miller, said. Miller had been on the force for 20 years. He had arrested 1,000 thieves, caught him red-handed, stole a loaf of artisan sourdough and a bottle of high-grade fever reducer. Security got him before he hit the edge of the lot. Julian looked down at Elias. Elias was still on the ground, his face pressed against the asphalt. The crushed loaf of bread lay in the gutter, the plastic packaging beginning to fill with rainwater. "Get him up," Julian said. 2 officers grabbed Elias by the armpits and hauled him to his feet. Elias stumbled, his legs weak. He looked at Julian. He didn't look like a criminal. He looked like a man who had reached the end of a very long dark tunnel and realized there was no exit. "Why the medicine?" Julian asked, his eyes narrowing. "Most people steal steak. Or electronics. Or expensive wine. You stole bread and medicine." Elias wiped a mixture of rain and tears from his face with his shoulder. "Why, daughter," he whispered. "Why, she's 7. She has a respiratory infection. The apartment, it has mold. I lost my job. I lost everything. She hasn't eaten in 2 days. She's burning up and I couldn't pay for the prescription." Julian stared at him. He didn't say anything for a long minute. The silence was heavy. The police officers shifted uncomfortably. They were used to hearing excuses. They were used to the sick child story. "He's lying, sir," the security guard said, stepping forward. "They always have a story. I saw him in the aisle." He looked shifty from the moment he walked in. Julian ignored the guard. He reached into Elias's open jacket and pulled out the bottle of medicine. He looked at the price tag. $28.50. Then he looked at the bread in the gutter. $2.49. "Sergeant Miller," Julian said. "Take the cuffs off him." Miller blinked. "Sir? He committed a felony. Shoplifting plus the value of the meds. And we've got him on camera." "I said take them off," Julian repeated. His voice hadn't raised, but it had a new edge to it. An edge that didn't brook any argument. Miller sighed and signaled to the younger officer. The metal clicks of the handcuffs unlocking sounded like gunshots in the quiet night. Elias rubbed his wrists, looking confused. "Now," Julian said, looking at Elias. "Take me to your daughter." "Sir." Elias gasped. I live in a basement in East Point. It's not a place for someone like you." "I didn't ask for a description of the neighborhood, Elias," Julian said. "I asked you to take me to her. Sergeant, you and your men follow us. I want to see if this man is a thief or if he's a father." The procession of cars moved through the city. Julian's black Mercedes S-Class led the way, followed by 3 police cruisers with their lights off, but their presence felt. They turned off the main boulevards, away from the glass towers and the manicured lawns. The streets got narrower. The potholes got deeper. The houses looked like they were leaning against each other for support. They stopped in front of a gray, crumbling brick building. Elias led them down a set of narrow rusted stairs to a heavy wooden door. When he opened it, the smell hit them first. It was the smell of damp earth, old grease, and the sharp, cloying scent of black mold. The apartment was barely a room. There was a single hot plate, a crate that served as a table, and a thin mattress on the floor. And there, huddled under a pile of thin, mismatched blankets, was Maya. She was smaller than she should have been. Her hair was matted with sweat. Her breathing was a terrifying sound, a wet, metallic rattle that filled the small space. Sergeant Miller, who had walked in behind Julian, stopped in his tracks. He was a father of 3. He knew that sound. That wasn't a cold. That was the sound of a child's lungs giving up. Julian walked over to the bed. He didn't care about his expensive coat. He knelt on the dirty floor and placed his hand on Maya's forehead. He recoiled. Easily. "She's burning," Julian said. He looked back at the police officers. "Miller, call for a private ambulance." "No. Not a city rig. I want the pediatric transport from North Side." "On it," Miller said. His voice was tight. He walked out to his car, his hand shaking as he reached for his radio. Julian looked at Elias, who was hovering by the door, looking terrified. "How long has she been like this?" 3 days, Elias said, his voice breaking. "I took her to the ER. They gave me a script. But the pharmacy, they wouldn't give it to me. I had $46. The bill was $180. I went back today to try to find work, but no one wanted a man who looks like me." Julian stood up. He looked around the room. He saw the empty cupboards, the crate, and then he saw something else. In the corner there was a small wooden bird. It was carved with such intricate detail that you could almost see the individual feathers. Julian picked it up. "Who made this?" "I did," Elias said. "I was a master carpenter. Before the merger. Before the machines took over." Julian ran his thumb over the smooth wood. He looked at the bird, then at the dying child, then at the man who had been pinned in the dirt over a loaf of bread. The ambulance arrived 15 minutes later. The EMTs rushed in with a stretcher. They stabilized Maya, hooked her up to oxygen, and began the transport. Elias went to climb in the back, but Julian stopped him. "Go with them," Julian said. "I'll meet you there." "Why are you doing this?" Elias asked. "You were going to arrest me." Julian looked at the wooden bird in his hand. "Because, Elias, 30 years ago, I was standing in a market in Chicago. I had a sick mother and a pocket full of nothing. I stole a gallon of milk. The owner caught me. He called the police. I spent 2 years in the system. My mother died while I was behind bars because there was no one to care for her." Julian's eyes were cold, but they weren't looking at Elias. They were looking at the past. "I built an empire so I would never be that boy again. But tonight I realized that I had become the man who called the police. I forgot what it was like to be the one in the rain." The next 72 hours were a blur of white hallways and the beep of heart monitors. Maya was placed in the ICU. The doctors told Elias that if he hadn't brought her in that night, her lungs would have failed by morning. The stolen medicine wouldn't have been enough. She needed intravenous antibiotics and a specialized team. Julian Vane didn't just pay for the ambulance. He paid for the room. He paid for the specialist. He paid for the private nurses. On the 3rd day, Maya woke up. Her fever had broken. She looked at her father and smiled. "Daddy, did you get the bread?" Elias couldn't speak. He just took her hand and cried. But while Maya was recovering, the world outside was changing. Sergeant Miller hadn't just called the ambulance that night. He had gone back to the station and told his captain what had happened. He told the other officers about the basement. He told them about the master carpenter who was carving birds while his daughter starved. The story leaked. A local news reporter got wind of the billionaire and the bread thief. By Friday, the video from the store's security camera had hit the internet. But it wasn't the video people expected. Someone had leaked the audio from Julian's office. Julian had a policy of recording every interaction in his store for quality control. The public heard the security guard mocking Elias. They heard the callousness. And then they saw the aftermath. Julian Vane did something he had never done. He called a press conference in front of his flagship store, the same spot where Elias had been pinned to the ground. 300 people gathered. There were cameras from every major network. Julian stood at the podium looking at the crowd. He looked different. The charcoal coat was gone. He was wearing a simple sweater and jeans. 3 days ago, Julian began, a man was arrested on this property. He stole a loaf of bread. He stole a bottle of medicine. I stood by and watched as he was treated like a common criminal. I want to tell you that I was wrong. The crowd went silent. We live in a city of billions, Julian continued. We track every cent. We optimize every shelf. But we have stopped seeing people. We see consumers. We see shrinkage. We see liabilities. We don't see fathers. We don't see children. Julian signaled to someone behind him. Elias stepped out. He was dressed in a clean suit, but he looked uncomfortable in the spotlight. Elias Thorne is a master craftsman, Julian said. He is a man of honor who was pushed to the edge by a world that values machines over souls. Effective. Immediately, I am launching the Vane Second Chance Foundation. We are committing $10 million to provide emergency medical funds and job placement for those who have fallen through the cracks. The crowd began to cheer, but Julian held up his hand. But more than that, Julian said, looking at Elias. I have a vacancy. My markets pride themselves on artisan quality. But for years we've been selling bread made in factories. We've been selling furniture made from compressed sawdust. That ends today. Elias, I want you to design the interiors for every new market we build. I want your hands on the wood. I want your soul in the stores. And in the back of every Vane market there will be a bakery where the bread is free for anyone who can't pay. No questions asked. No police called. The restoration of Elias Thorne was complete, but the universe wasn't finished. With the proud. Remember the security guard? The one who had sneered at Elias and called him shifty? His name was Marcus. He had been with the company for 5 years and he was known for being the top enforcer of shoplifting policies. He prided himself on his zero tolerance. A week after the press conference, Marcus was called into Julian's office. He walked in with a smirk, expecting a promotion for protecting the assets during the media storm. Julian was sitting behind his desk. He didn't look up from a file. Marcus, Julian said. I've been reviewing the tapes from the night of the arrest. Not just the ones in the parking lot. The ones from the break room. Marcus's smirk vanished. Julian turned a monitor around. On the screen Marcus was shown talking to another guard. He was laughing. He was holding a bag of gourmet steaks that he hadn't paid for. He was bragging about how he pads his grocery list by taking things from the inventory and marking them as damaged or stolen. You called Elias Thorne a thief, Julian said. His voice was like ice. He stole to save a life. You stole because you felt entitled. He stole with a broken heart. You stole with a greedy one. Sir, I can explain, Marcus started. You don't have to, Julian said. The police are waiting outside. Sergeant Miller is very interested in the $12,000 worth of missing inventory from the last 6 months. You aren't just fired, Marcus. You're being charged with grand larceny. As Marcus was led out in handcuffs, the very same ones he had put on Elias, he passed a group of workers in the lobby. They were carrying a large wooden sign. It was carved from solid oak with a beautiful bird in the corner. It read, "The House of Bread, where no one goes hungry." Elias Thorne's life changed forever that month. He and Maya moved into a bright, airy house near a park. Maya grew up to be a doctor specializing in respiratory health for children in low-income neighborhoods. He never forgot the taste of that first loaf of bread Julian Vane brought to her hospital room, the bread that had been paid for in full by a man who found his heart again. And Julian Vane? He stopped being the ruthless tycoon. He spent his weekends at the woodshop Elias built, learning how to turn a raw slab of timber into something beautiful. He realized that wealth isn't about what you keep in your bank account. It's about what you give away when no one is watching. And that is the lesson of this tale. Your value doesn't decrease because someone fails to see it. The people who try to break you are always the ones who can't build anything themselves. And sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't be and letting them watch from the sidelines. In the end, we are all just walking each other home. Some of us have bread in our bags and some of us have nothing but hope. But as long as there are people who choose mercy over judgment, no one has to walk in the rain alone. Remember the words of the old proverb: a river does not drink its own water. A tree does not eat its own fruit. The sun does not shine for itself. Living for others is the rule of nature. If this story moved your heart, if it reminded you that kindness is the greatest currency we have, please subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you can join us for our next journey into the heart of humanity. Like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today and tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a moment of unexpected mercy? Thank you for watching. Stay kind, stay humble, and remember, the hand that gives is the hand that receives. We'll see you in the next story.